Hello, everyone. Welcome to D2Football.com's Super Region 1 Playoff Podcast. I'm Chuck Bitner, along with our PSAC columnist, Cary Moyer. We're so happy to be back for our second season of these specials that we're doing with playoff podcasts. Cary and I both have a lot of expertise around Super Region 1, so we're going to cover the SR1 bracket. Of course, we've already done the podcast for SR3 and SR4. SR2 will probably air tomorrow. Still working on some of the resource alignment there. But very happy to have you with us tonight. If you're watching live, thank you so much for tuning in. We didn't do this live last year. We just recorded it and put it out. So we're going to try doing this a little bit differently this year. So if you're out there in the comments, feel free to send us your questions. Feel free to send us your comments, and I'll put them up there and make Cary react to all of your questions. So, Cary, thank you so much for agreeing to do this again. I'm so happy to have you here. Let's start by looking at our Super Region 1 playoff bracket. Now, you are our PSAC expert. I imagine you were pretty happy to see 4 teams made the playoff field. I think we felt pretty comfortable that those 4 teams were going to be in. But what were some of your reactions? Let's start with Kutztown being the number 1 seed. It was really close going into the weekend. When we watched the playoff selection show, did you feel confident that Kutztown was going to be the number 1 seed?
I did, and no doubt about it. I think they're the best team in the bracket. Of course, PSAC homer here, but when the first alphabetical listing came out, we saw all these teams from the PSAC, and with all the analytical guys out there crunching the numbers, I think it played out the way we thought it would. Of course, Charleston was in that number 1 seed. Up through the last week of the regular season, week 11 with Kutztown win the PSAC championship. It played out, I think, as most of us expected that with that win that would secure them the number 1 seed.
It was really close between Kutztown and Charleston. When you break down all the metrics, and there's different ways you could kind of interpret those, maybe different. You could put emphasis on different metrics to maybe try to make a case for either team. I think you could have done that because it was so close between the two of them. I think the other thing that really kind of stood out, though, to me was the fact that California didn't move out of that 3rd position despite the loss in the PSAC championship. I wasn't really sure how that was going to play out for them. I think their strength of schedule and also the fact that their 2 losses were to Kutztown and Charleston, the 2 number 1 teams. How did you see that? Were you a little surprised to see that they still were on the 3rd line?
Well, again, I think with a lot of the reaction out there, I think historically the losing the PSAC championship game is not necessarily a negative, especially with the high quality teams that were both in there. Not surprised that they're there. If they would have maybe slipped the 4th, I wouldn't say I would have been overly surprised with that either.
Yeah, I thought there was potential for maybe East Stroudsburg to slot up a position and get a home game because of their 10-1 record. I think when you looked at California's overall strength of schedule and some of the results against the common opponents, and I also think probably what made a big difference for them was a couple of quality wins in the resume that some of the teams behind them did not have. And of course, one of those being Slippery Rock definitely worked to the advantage of Cal staying up there in the 3rd position in those final rankings. And then our unseeded teams, New Haven, Ashland, and of course East Stroudsburg out of the PSAC. There was no real drama there with the Northeast 10. It certainly looked like New Haven was going to be their representative. Of course, we know we don't have automatic bids into the playoffs, but as long as a team from a conference, if the highest ranked team in that conference is 9th or higher, that conference will be represented. Also, don't think earned access was even an issue here this year. So felt very good about New Haven's chances, and they made it into the field. Ashland coming out of the Great Midwest was a little bit interesting because when you looked at how that league finished out, Ashland actually did win the conference championship. Finley actually finished with the best record at 9-2. I know some folks at Finley kind of felt that was probably going to get them into the postseason. I really didn't see it that way. I think Ashland was definitely the right choice to get into the field here. They are the conference champion, and the fact that they beat Tiffin and Finley, who are the 2 teams that finished behind them, I thought for sure that Ashland was the right team to be in the playoffs representing the Great Midwest. So that is our field. And Cary, let's take a closer look at some of these teams because we want to kind of introduce the audience. Maybe we'll have some people watching who are learning about some of these teams for the first time. So we're going to kind of walk through who these teams are, kind of give you a picture of what their journey has been like. And then we'll actually preview the 3 matchups this coming weekend and make our picks and kind of tell you how we see that. So let's start at the top and take a real quick look at the Kutztown Golden Bears. Of course, they are the PSAC champions. Second year in a row, they won the championship game at California this past weekend. Let's take a look at what their journey has looked like this year. Cary, it's kind of simple. All W's from top to bottom.
Definitely. And I think, you look at the top of the schedule, Kutztown the last few years has kind of had, coming out of the gate slow. They took care of business with Assumption. I was at the Edinburgh game. I know Coach Clemens, talking to him, he liked that game in the matchup because he thought, as far as the way those teams are put together and play a style of ball, that was a really good, measuring stick. And of course, the East Stroudsburg game, was a huge one. And, I was at that game. It was a night game up at Eiler Martin Stadium, up at East Stroudsburg. And to me, that was a very telling game. Kutztown, was down 14-0 in the first quarter. And again, they may get the rap a little bit of great defense and they just pounded out, type of offense. But for them to be able to just keep their composure, which this Kutztown team does, and just come back and get the W and, 27-21, that was kind of neat. That showed me a lot there. And then right in the table, through the PSAC East, with Bloom and Lockhaven, Shepherd, was at that game as well too. Shepherd, again, traditionally awesome program. Always expect to be on this bracket. They're not this year. Of course, last year they actually got shipped down to Super Region 2 to go to Lenore Ryan, and Virginia Union came up to Super Region 1. But, that was just an impressive defensive victory, again, for KU. And, side note here, in this middle of the schedule towards the end of the season, I mean, the Kutztown Golden Bears defense went, a whole month where their starting defense didn't give up a touchdown for over a month. The Millersville game, again, that was just 2 defensive touchdowns, pick sixes before the offense even got onto the field. I was at that game, and I know, Coach Clemens kind of wanted to win the second half too, but Kutztown, their starters were out at half. It was the 2s and the 3s in, and, that's when Millersville got some scores. And, with Westchester, again, some growing pains with, Coach Greca, the new coach, kind of got things figured out and really finished the season strong. Again, you have the offensive player of the year in the PSAC East at the quarterback at Westchester, and the Golden Bears handled business there. And of course the PSAC championship game last week, they took care of business. And I know we'll probably talk some more about Kutztown next week, or as when the brackets were being revealed, it was just like watching Monday Night Football when Andre Reed was playing Kutztown. But we all know it's Kutztown. But one of the things is the defense is so dominating. They get a lot of the hype. But when you look at the offense, their offense was second in the PSAC, in the entire PSAC, not just the East, in putting up points and scoring points as well. When you look at this as a team, again, this is going to be a common theme as we head into the playoffs is, who's healthy, that's a thing. But, Kutztown definitely had guys that were banged up at different positions through the season. The next guy stepped up. They're deep. They've got depth. And, again, offense, that offensive line, I think is incredible. I think they, all the postseason honors just came out today, still trying to process it all. I think they had 3 guys, from the offensive line that were first team. The offensive line, with having that offensive line, Judd, Novak at quarterback, different guys touching the ball. I think that's a big thing too. And I've tweeted or posted now on X before about in the PSAC, it's having an offensive line, having great offensive line coaches is a difference maker, with a lot. But I think out of all the teams in the PSAC, I can say this probably most confidently about Kutztown is they were very consistent. They didn't have a whole bunch of up and downs in their games. They just, and again, it's a reflection of Coach Clemens, who, the PSAC East Coach of the Year, AFC A Regional Coach of the Year again. It's just, and I've talked about this before, they bring in high school guys, they get them into their system, they coach them up, and it's a well-oiled machine. Probably in most recent history, with the PSAC, that team has, like I said, was more consistent with coming out every week than I think I've seen a team in a long time.
For sure. And I guess just a few notes from myself, having watched the Golden Bears all season as well. Obviously the East Stroudsburg and California wins are kind of their landmark wins that you would really, put out there as quality wins. But also if you look at Bloomsburg, Lock Haven, and Westchester, all three of those teams were really trending upward when Kutztown played them. And they really took care of business very methodically in all those games. And even though Shepherd wasn't a vintage Shepherd team this year, anytime you can shut them out, that's some pretty impressive work. And so the other thing that kind of jumps out to me, and we'll go to actually just a quick snapshot of the stats. When we look down those results, not a lot of teams were able to put up more than one score against Kutztown. I think really there was only one or maybe two that put up three scores. And obviously one of those, the Millersville game, that was a lot of garbage time, as you said. So it's just some incredible work by their defense all season long to get them to 11-0. That obviously jumps right off the page, less than 10 points per game allowed. There's a lot we'll dive into when we look at matchups next week, but you had made a comment to me before we started the show about how, their defense seems to overshadow their offense. So I think if you look at the offense and what they're capable of, 30 points a game, pretty darn good.
Especially when you're only giving up, a little bit more than a touchdown a game. Two scores should win it for you. But no, and again, the defense, and I know we talked about this, Chuck, too. It's like, again, it's who I am, playing 14 years, always being a lineman. I always gravitate watching those guys up front. Of course, Freddie Redder, defensive lineman, was the PSAC East defensive player of the year this year. Love that kid. I think he does great things, in and out. But talking to somebody else I'm connected with, in football world, who actually has a son playing on another PSAC East team this year, he talked about just the defensive backs and how great they are in locking things down. So, it's a whole complement on defense up front, great linebackers, and great D-backs. But again, you can't take it away from the offense. They put up points, and they've got, a lot of ways that they can hurt you. And, I think that this team is built for a deep playoff run.
I agree. And all of that led to a first round bye for the Golden Bears, much deserved. So they will actually get to spend the weekend resting, recuperating, practicing, and just working on their own improvements to get ready for that round 2 game, which of course will be at home for them next Saturday. So let's move on and look at our number 2 seed in this region. 2-time defending champs in the Mountain East Conference, Charleston. Won the Mountain East second year in a row. Great accomplishment for them. And like the Golden Bears, 11-0, went through the full season undefeated. There were a few challenges along the way, but really, Cary, their season was a lot like Kutztown's. Now, you'll see a little bit more of the story told on the offensive side of the ball here with Charleston, but also a very good defensive football team as well. And really, things kind of started off very strongly for Charleston. I think they really got a lot of credibility with that week 2. Actually, it was week 1 following the week 0 win. But that week 1 game against California, that was at Charleston. And they ground out a tough win over a Cal team that we now know is also very good. This Charleston team started the season in the top 25. I think that win really solidified them as a legit top 25 team. Of course, they've been in the poll every week since then. When you saw that result week 1, what were some of your thoughts that the Charleston had won that game?
That was a thing again, trying to keep up on all the scores, all the games that were going on. I remember shooting you that DM that saying, "Hey, Charleston beat Cal 23-19." So, again, little did I know, we know back then that the way these guys were going to finish out the seasons. Of course, again, Charleston running the table, being undefeated. Again, was in our Super Region 1 playoffs last year as well. So that was kind of a thing. And then I'll talk a little bit more about Cal when we get to them. But yeah, so that was impressive, and I think it really that top quality opponent, and like you said, Charleston in our top 25, and now moving up and into the top 10, and have been there for a few weeks. Tip of the cap to them, with the season they had, and again, consistency throughout.
I actually had a chance to see Charleston up close. I went to the game at Frostburg State, and we kind of expected that was going to be one of the top games in the entire country that weekend. Both teams coming in at 6-0, and that was a ball game for about 3 to 4 minutes. And that was all it really took for Charleston to assert their authority in that game. Just absolutely walloped Frostburg State 48-7 as a final. That final absolutely tells the story of that game. It was extremely one-sided. A couple of things that stood out to me. Obviously, I knew all about Siobhan Wright. Outstanding running back that they have. He is already over 2,000 yards for the season. Incredible accomplishment in an 11-game season. He's already tied the Division II record for rushing touchdowns in a season, hasn't even yet played a postseason game. So I feel pretty good that he'll own that record in due course. I knew all about him. I knew that they were a very strong running team. I knew that they were a physical football team. A couple of things that stood out, like you, Cary, I tend to watch the game up front because, as much as college football has evolved over the years, I still think it's a line of scrimmage game. I still think you win and lose games at the line of scrimmage. Their size and their physicality really stood out to me, especially on the offensive side of the ball. They have very good size in the offensive line. And obviously, when you're rushing for, well in excess of 200 yards a game, you're doing that behind a very strong offensive line. So I expected that, but it still did really stand out to me. But a couple of other things that really stood out. Ian Hamrick, their starting quarterback, really good player. Cary, he's a little bit like Judd Novak. Very good at improv, can make a play out of almost anything. Good rushing threat, but also a very credible passer as well. And he was not even the starter at the open of the season. They had an incumbent starter, Javonte Howard, very good player for them last year. And he got hurt in week 3. Ian Hamrick came in, and he has just been playing exceptional football all season long since then. And although we think of them as a rushing team, they have a trio of really good wide receivers. The one that you want to watch for is Yves Bozeman's number 6. He was actually our national player of the week back in, I believe it was week 3 against the UNC Pembroke game. He was our player of the week as a wide receiver, had 4 touchdowns, and he is a very exciting playmaker for them as well. So, yeah, we know all about Siobhan Wright, amazing player, but it doesn't end with him. So that Charleston offense is a lot to contend with. But also, you look down through some of those results, and we'll take a look at the stat snapshot. 44 points a game, pretty amazing. But also, if you're scoring 40 points, 44 per game, and only giving up 17. That's a pretty big spread. It's not a team that's scoring 44 but giving up 32. That's a pretty impressive spread to have, for sure.
No, definitely. And, again, it's the, they're imposing their will on other teams. And you talked about that Frostburg game. I know, of course, most of my stuff is about the PSAC, but I kept putting out the little post there of, hey, big one here in Super Region 1. And I think was kind of a turning point, for me. It was like, okay, these guys are for real, and being able to run the table. And again, that's not a given. I mean, how many weeks in a row did we see our number 1 in our top 25, lose the game, and we kind of had a revolving door up top. But very much like Kutztown, same with Charleston, they took care of business week in, week out, and ran the table.
It's hard to get through any conference undefeated. Obviously, some conferences are more difficult top to bottom than others, but it's hard to get through any league undefeated in any level of football. I'm pretty convinced of that. So, undefeated conference champs, the first two seeds in this region. Let's go to the third seed. California will play at home this weekend. Unfortunately, took a loss in the conference championship game at home to Kutztown last week. Their only other loss, though, Cary, back in that opener that we talked about, to Charleston. So, we kind of alluded to this. One of the things that really kind of helped them hang on to that top 3 seed was the fact that they, obviously won 8 games. But, your losses are to the 2 best teams in this region. But looking at the schedule here, there's also some really impressive wins that stand out.
Definitely, and I know we've talked about this. We talk about this every year. To be able to run the table in the PSAC West is a feat. It doesn't matter who's ranked top 25, who's not. When you see the games, and we've seen this year after year, it's like, okay, who beat who in head-to-head competition? Gannon was in the mix a little bit, but when you're talking about California, PA, Slippery Rock, and IUP, all the top rankings, everything goes out the window. Those are always knock them down, drag them out types of games. And, again, IUP, a few of their losses there, we're real close, just like the one that's on the schedule in front of us, with the overtime loss to Cal. But again, that is, to me, that stands out. That's huge. If you can run the table in the PSAC West, again, usually it comes down to, okay, who beat who between Slippery Rock, IUP, and Cal. And Cal took care of business. Again, impressive win over, a all through the season top 25 team for us with Slippery Rock. And when you've got to play Slippery Rock and IUP back to back, again, that's not easy scheduling. And, again, even looking at their crossovers with the PSAC East, Westchester, we know, has done things offensively, being able to shut down, their quarterback, enough to be able to come away with the win. In Lock Haven, they're just there. They're about one step away, but they put up points as well. The bottom line is it's like coming away with the W, and they've done it.
They have, and we'll take a real quick look at their snapshot. For me, and we'll talk a little bit about it when we get to the actual matchup, but I think when I look at California as a snapshot, the offensive numbers don't immediately jump off the page, but the skill talent on that offense, I think it's as good as anybody in this bracket.
Definitely, and I think that was a big key to Kutztown's win in the championship game. Davis Black, incredible quarterback. His body type, his style kind of reminds me a little bit of Bagent. Don't want to start anything there with the comparison, but again, a big dude and can sling it. But in the championship game with Boyd pretty much being shut down at running back and Willis being shut down at receiver, not too many people can do that. So they can hurt you. They can hurt you on the ground. They can hurt you through the air as well.
For sure. And obviously, I'll just point it out, there's a whiff on the screenshot there. California, not 11-0. That's a copy-paste error on my part, but Vulcans go into the playoffs at 8-2. Slippery Rock comes in at the number 4 seed, also carry out of that very competitive PSAC West. Here's the story of their season, 10-game season. Of course, some of the PSAC West teams had a really hard time filling out the schedule because of the Mercyhurst move up to D1 that came very late in the cycle. A lot of those teams, unfortunately, we're not able to get an 11th game. That's why traditionally these teams all play 11. Really, that's why California and Slippery Rock only had 10-game seasons. Really great results for the Rock all season. Of course, they did take the loss at California. A little bit of a different look, though, when you look at this team compared to what we have known Slippery Rock to be in the last couple of years. Explosive offense is really what's kind of put them on the map nationally. A lot of things that we've been able to talk about and highlight and spotlight with Slippery Rock really were more on the offensive side of the football. Now, they've always been a pretty good defensive football team as well, but they've really relied on that more this year to kind of grind out some tough wins. You look at some of those results, a lot of close games. Really kind of started early on in the season. That win with New Haven, That was, I think, closer than that score indicates. So we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about the rematch. But that was a really tough game. And then going down to Shepherd and having to slug one out with them and win it 20-10. Some of those wins were just a little bit of a different look for the Rock this year.
Definitely. And, it's one of the things, and again, need to say it, at this point of season 2, it's like, who's healthy and do you have your guys? But it was kind of some inconsistencies as far as, putting together 4 quarters in a game, for the Rock. Most of the time they were able to find a way to get the win and come out on top. But, again, impressive. Again, Shepherd is Shepherd, impressive win early. First, beating New Haven, beating Shepherd, Shippensburg, Edinburgh at that time. Again, Edinburgh's been up and down. They beat IUP. They beat D1 FCS Robert Morris. Edinburgh, it's kind of a tale of two teams with them. But again, with IUP 33-32. Again, that's the PSAC West. Those IUP, Slippery Rock, and Cal games. And I think, towards the end of the season, with Braden Long, quarterback, there was a game there where he hit those 399 yards. And it's like, okay, that's the, kind of what we expect to see out of Slippery Rock. So here's the thing. It's a new season. It all starts over again. And if they can click on all cylinders and put it together, I talk about this all the time. All 4 of these teams that are in from the PSAC have incredible coaching staffs. A lot of these guys have been together for a lot of years. They work, well together. They coach these guys up, but, it comes down to having the dudes. Slippery Rock has the dudes, if the dudes and everything clicks every week, they can be unbeatable.
They're always a handful. And I actually said on Inside D2 a couple times earlier this year that I really liked the way they were winning games. We weren't always seeing that explosive pop offensively that we kind of knew them for. But, I liked the fact that they were winning games with defense. I liked the fact that they were kind of grinding out some tough games. Those first couple games, one of the reasons they were able to win is because of ball control. They were able to keep the ball away from the opponent late in the game and just grind out the clock. And I like winning football games that way personally. So I was actually really impressed by that. Here's a snapshot: scoring offense, 28 points per game. Again, we normally would expect to see that a little bit higher in some of the Slippery Rock teams we've seen in the past. But still, they're doing a lot to win football games, and, a lot of balance out of that offense from rushing to passing. And that typically has been the case for them. I know we perceived them a lot as a passing offense. So they've always been a very strong rushing offense as well. So let's go on and take a look at East Stroudsburg. Cary, the Warriors just had a little bit of a time really kind of getting the respect that they probably deserved this year. A lot of that just had to do with the schedule, the way that fell for them. Just didn't really have a lot of opportunities to show us what kind of a team they are. Of course, their best opportunity during the season was the Kutztown game. And of course, that did end up being a loss for them. But this is a 10-1 football team that has just played at a very high level all year.
Definitely. And, kind of talking about this, with how Kutztown's defense maybe is overshadowing their offense, I think East Stroudsburg offense overshadows their defense a little bit. Again, they've done a great job in, coming through when they had to, albeit, the one, lost to Kutztown. But, even as you look as you go through, they've have some shutouts in there. But again, taking a quick look, they ended up 3rd in the PSAC, with points per game against, on defense. So, not a bad job with that. But again, Coach Twig, great guy. Again, coaching staff that's been together for a long time. They started to, really put things together last season and, just hit the ground running from, the first game all the way through, except, for the Kutztown game. And I'm really excited to see where the Warriors go, in the Super Region 1 bracket.
Yeah, I know. I was getting messages probably from about mid-season on about when's East Stroudsburg going to be in the top 25 poll because, of course, the record was very, very good and they kept winning games. Unfortunately for them, the strength of schedule throughout the season just wasn't what it would have needed to be to kind of get them into that conversation. But they did end the regular season as a top 25. And of course, more importantly, they are in the playoff field. So there's your kind of snapshot view. I think of all the teams in this bracket, Cary, when you look at the balance that they have between rushing and passing. And I know, coaches have told me when they consider balance, that's not necessarily like, we pass for 200 a game and we rush for 200 a game, but it's when we need to run the ball, we can run the ball. When we need to pass the ball, we can pass the ball. And I think that's what you see with these Stroudsburg.
Oh, definitely. And it's one of the things of they don't have a one back that is standing out, but there was, with one of my columns towards the end of the season, I put it in about, Lewis and Mills. They were within like one carry of each other and like a couple yards of each other. And when you put those two guys together at that point, again, starting to come through all the final stats for the season. But when you put those guys together, they're kind of elite back status, for, a workhorse that would begin it, anywhere. And again, their passing game is a threat. It was last year. It's there. Again, the bounced attack is important, going into the playoffs here in Super Region 1.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so that's our look at the Warriors. And as we move further into the bracket, New Haven Chargers, champions of the Northeast 10 Conference. Again, there they are celebrating on the blue turf. Cary, have you ever seen the blue turf up there at Della Camara Stadium?
Yes.
I somehow have only managed to be there and see it on very, very bright sunny days. That is not the time to see the blue turf up there at Della Camara. Let me tell you, when the sun
not those late August, early September now.
But it is very unique. It's actually a very good facility and a fun place to see a game as well. So there are your Northeast 10 champions. Let's take a look at their journey. Now we're going to talk more about that matchup with Slippery Rock because, of course, we do have a rematch coming up with them. So they actually started the season with a loss. Of course, that was out of conference, didn't impact their Northeast 10 conference standings. And then they started really, really strong in conference. So when you look at those scores, Cary, after that game at Slippery Rock, when they only posted 7 points, well over 40 points a game for the next several weeks until they got down to their matchup with Southern Connecticut. Of course, that's a huge rivalry game for them. Very one-sided at this point, but that's a huge rivalry for them against their kind of crosstown rival. And then they actually had a really tough outing with an Assumption team that was very up and down all this season. Assumption's results are just very difficult to reconcile. They had a couple of really quality wins over New Haven and Bentley, but a couple of head-scratching losses. But for New Haven, unfortunately, one of those head-scratching results was that they took a loss to the Greyhounds. It was their only conference loss of the season, so they still come out of this as the Northeast 10 champions. But when I look at those scores and look at those results, Cary, one of the things that really kind of jumps out is when New Haven played some offenses or played some defenses that couldn't quite match up with them from a talent perspective, they just overwhelmed them. They have a really, really strong rushing attack. Christopher Ace, probably one of the best running backs in the country, to be honest with you. But he's not the only one that they have. They actually have a trio of running backs that are really, really strong players. In fact, there were some times during the season when Zayon Maloney actually ended up Laney, I should say. I want to make sure I get his name right. Zayon Laney. He actually ended up being kind of their go-to guy a couple times during the season and put up some big numbers. And after him, they also had the transfer back Felder, who had actually played a couple of seasons and had over 3,000 yards at Stonehill and actually had been out of the game for a couple of years. And he was an All-American caliber running back at Stonehill before he had kind of disappeared for a little bit. So whoever gets the carries out of the backfield, Cary, it's a really strong physical runner. And they really do just kind of impose their will, to kind of use the term that you had mentioned a little bit earlier. They've been able to do that quite a bit against teams that they were able to overwhelm. But when you look at those results against some of the teams like Slippery Rock, Assumption, and actually St. Anselm, who was a pretty tough defense, it's a very different story. So I do have some concerns for New Haven that when they can't really establish the rush, they can get into trouble. And I think that's where we'll probably see them run into some problems here in the playoff bracket. They've got to be able to run the football. They've got to be able to establish that, because if they don't, and they really have to rely more on the passing offense, it's just been a little inconsistent throughout the year. When we look at those two games that they lost, and then also the game at St. Anselm, which was the other game where their offense really struggled, they were way under 50% passing. And that's just not going to do it in the playoffs. And, I think that they have the potential. Dalen Menard is a very experienced quarterback, and he's had a lot of success for the Chargers. So I know that they feel confident in him, but I think that they're probably going to have to get a little bit more out of that passing offense as we get a little bit deeper into this playoff season. When you look at the numbers, that's a pretty telling story there. 238 rushing. If you can rush for 238, you're going to win a lot of football games. And you only have to ask for 160 yards out of your passing game. But when they don't get the 238 on the ground, that's when things get a little bit tight for New Haven. So a couple things, though, to emphasize about their defense. I mean, you look at the rushing stats, that's getting into Kutztown territory. Really, really strong physical defense. They're top 20 in tackles for loss and actually number 1 in sacks. So if they can match up with Slippery Rock, that's how they're going to have to do it. It's going to have to be a tough defensive football game. So we'll get more into that as we dive into the matchup. But I think this New Haven team has potential to be a tough out, but there's also potential that things could go sideways for them a little bit if they can't run the ball. So that's our Northeast 10 champion and Northeast 10 rep in the playoff bracket. And we round things off going to the Great Midwest, the Ashland Eagles in the playoffs again. Ashland, champions of the Great Midwest Conference. We'll take a look at their schedule. Cary, they actually opened with IUP. They've actually played IUP, I believe, 4 times in the last 3 seasons, if you include the playoffs. None of the results have gone their way, but we know who IUP is, and Ashland has shown the ability to match up with them from a talent standpoint. Most of these have been close games. I know you probably didn't get a chance to take a really close look at that, but what were some of your thoughts when you were breaking down that game in the preseason?
Well, again, IUP is IUP, and again, that's a great measuring stick, for any team. So really, when you look at the first 2 games, losing to IUP early, and of course Ferris State early, that's I don't know too many teams in the country that would want that as game 1 and game 2, playing IUP and Ferris State. But obviously put things together, came back, and some traditionally strong teams there. Of course, Tiffin's been in Super Region 1 playoffs recently. And again, you talked about, Findlay a little bit when we were talking earlier too. So that was a big win for them. So again, it's a new season.
Yeah, I think I was really surprised by the loss at Walsh. I think as we got down to the last couple of weeks of the season, and Ashland's kind of riding a 7-game winning streak here, I'm looking at them closing out the season with Walsh and Kentucky Wesleyan, and I'm thinking they're going to take those 2 wins and walk right into the playoffs, and maybe even get a chance to host a game. Boy, Walsh really had some different ideas there, and I got to watch most of that game this morning to kind of get a little bit more of an idea of how that went and why it happened. When you talked about those first 2 games of the year, IUP and Ferris State, of course, very physical football teams, very difficult for a team coming out of the GMAC to match up with the team as physical as Ferris State, and IUP is typically a physical mismatch for most teams as well. Walsh, probably not one of the teams that we had put in that same category. They really stood up and matched Ashland's level of physicality, really played them tough at the line of scrimmage, made them work for every yard. And I really think that made the difference in the game. So, I think that could be really eye-opening when we look at this matchup coming up with Charleston. Ashland's going to have to find another level here. We've seen that they're capable of it. Of course, their results against the quality teams in their conference, Tiffin and Findlay, they were without a doubt the better team on those days. I think maybe as you got towards deeper in the season, Ashland is still a very young team. Their coaches have talked about this a couple times this year. They're a very young team. When you look at their roster, they have some seniors in key spots. Of course, Trevor Brzezinski, the quarterback, really stands out as their senior leader. And they have a few really key standouts on defense as well. But they are a young team, a ton of underclassmen in the roster. I think about half of their roster is freshmen and redshirt freshmen. So, this might actually be a team that's a year ahead of schedule. So the fact that they're here in the playoffs, really great season for them, really great look for them. And let's take a look at the stats. So a couple things about Ashland. I think when you look at the scoring offense, I think that's probably the lowest. I did an unscientific review of that last night, just looking at the 28 playoff teams. I think that might be the lowest scoring output of any of the teams that made the playoffs. And that differential between scoring offense and scoring defense, that's probably about the closest that we'll see as well. But, again, Cary, look at that rushing defense. This is another team that wins games by being very tough at the line of scrimmage, being able to establish the run, and then also being able to stop the run. So we'll see as we get into these matchups. I think that they're a team that probably needs to run the ball a little bit more than they have. They have a good, credible passing attack. We talked about Brzezinski. I mentioned him. Tony Panunzio, their standout wide receiver, he has been really good down the stretch for them. But I think that they're really going to have to be able to get a lot more out of that rushing offense. And I think that they're capable of it. We've seen as the season has gone on here, Tyara Stevenson's really stepped up in the second half of the season. He's closing in on 1,000 yards. He's been huge in the last couple of weeks, really kind of helped them overcome a couple of pieces of adversity in their last game against Kentucky Wesleyan. So I think he's a good horse to hitch their cart to. If they can establish a run with him, it's going to go a long way for them. But they've got some others on that team as well. Orlando Kamar, also a really, really good rushing threat coming out of that backfield. So we'll see if the Eagles can kind of get a little bit more out of that rushing offense. I think that they will need to, and if they do, I think that's going to give them a chance to compete in that matchup with Charleston. So that is a snapshot on the Ashland Eagles, rounding out our 7 teams in the Super Region 1 bracket. So, Cary, we have some football this weekend. Let's take a look at these matchups, and we'll kind of make our picks here for what we think is going to happen. Let's start off with our first round rematch. So we've kind of mentioned this a little bit already. We have New Haven going back to Slippery Rock. I made my pick on Inside D2 Football, so all my picks are actually already out there on the record. But I'll kind of talk through what my picks were and what I think is likely to happen here. But I do think Slippery Rock wins this game. But I think it's probably going to be a lot like the first time they played. I expect this to be fairly low scoring. In the first matchup that they had way back in week 1, it was all about defense and special teams. Special teams is a huge factor in this game. So I will give you one quick pointer on this game, Cary, and something. Actually, this will be a cheat sheet for the coaches at Slippery Rock. In terms of special teams, do not kick the ball to Khalil Eason. One of the best kick returners in the country for New Haven. He has 3 long kick returns for touchdowns. He's got a tremendous average. Kick the ball away from him. Do not let him have it. He could be a real X factor in this game if it is indeed low scoring. But I think it's going to be low scoring and defensive. I'll give a few more of my thoughts, but I've already put some of mine out there. Cary, how are you seeing this game?
Again, New Haven, has been in Super Region 1 playoffs. I've seen them play live, saw them down at, Shepherd the other year. And I think kind of how you described them as they're put together as a team. I think that's what I saw back then. Again, Slippery Rock, they've got the dudes. They've got a great coaching staff, Coach Lutz, and Coach Conrad, offensive line coach, great guys. And, again, they played all together. They play all 4 quarters. I have the Rock taking this.
Yeah, I do too. But I'll tell you, I do think that this can be close. And I know my guy Witt picked New Haven to win this. I do think it's within the realm of possibility. I do believe New Haven can win this game. I think that first matchup was actually a little bit closer than it looked. Statistically, it was very even. And New Haven's defense did a great job against Slippery Rock, just as Rock's defense did against New Haven. I think if New Haven could have eliminated some mistakes in that game, I think it would have come down to the last play. So what I'll really be looking for here is if the Chargers can establish the run. We know that's what they want to do. Strong rushing offense. If they can get something going with Christopher Ace, really, really strong running back. He's already over 1,000 yards for the season. If they can get him going, get a nice compliment with Zayon Laney, and he's got about 75 yards per game as well. If they can start to establish that, I think that they'll have a really good chance here. But again, they have to, because their passing offense just hasn't really been able to deliver when they needed to. If they're put into positions here in this game where the Rock is having enough success against their run that they have to throw the ball, if the Rock's able to put them behind the sticks, that's really bad territory for the Chargers in this game. So I do think they have an opportunity, but they're going to have to play excellent defense and they're going to have to play mistake-free football offensively. So that'll be our first matchup in the Super Region 1 bracket, a rematch of the regular season. Let's go to our second matchup. So this will actually be Ashland going to Charleston. First ever meeting between these two programs. So I think that is exciting in itself. A couple of head coaches that are still relatively new into their head coaching tenure. Quinn Sanders in his third year at Charleston, Doug Geiser his second year at Ashland. Both of them have outstanding records with their programs to date. So I think that this has a chance to be a good game. I wouldn't be shocked, Cary, if Charleston does win this by a couple of scores, but I think this could be really close as well. I think back to that first round game last year when New Haven went to Charleston. And I think you and I were probably standing on the field watching Virginia Union and Kutztown at that same time. And the first couple times we looked at the score, we thought, okay, well, that game's over because Charleston was up a couple scores. And all of a sudden, New Haven started to come back and made a tremendous game out of that. Could see something like that happen again. I think Ashland has enough talent that they can really make this a very difficult out for Charleston. All that said, I just think Charleston's rushing offense is going to be a little bit too much. And I talked about the fact that they also have a very credible passing threat and also a rushing quarterback in Ian Hamrick. So I think all told, it's just going to be a little bit too much for Ashland, and they are still young in certain areas. So I have this as a Charleston win. What do you think?
Well, again, Charleston, very much like, Kutztown, the other side of the bracket, has been consistent all year. They haven't had hiccups. That consistency piece. Again, new season, you talked a little bit about their first game last year. And of course, really had Kutztown on the ropes, in their Super Region 1 playoff game last year, and Kutztown came back and, took care of business and got the W. But I think Charleston's just been too consistent. And again, don't want to put the cart before the horse, but, they may very well run their side of the bracket here in Super Region 1. So going to go with Charleston.
All right. So that'll be our Great Midwest versus Mountain East matchup, which will be occurring at University of Charleston Stadium in Charleston, West Virginia. So, Cary, let's go to our final matchup in this bracket. And I think you and I both expect this to probably be the best game this weekend in this region. I'm going to let you lead and talk me through all of your talking points. You know both of these teams extremely well. It was something that occurred to me is that these two teams, in a sense, kind of played a playoff game a year ago. At the end of the regular season, East Stroudsburg had California come out to Eiler Martin. That ended up being kind of a play-in game for the Warriors, and they won that to get into the bracket. This year, they're actually going to meet in the postseason, officially in the tournament. Warriors going to California. Take us through some of the things that you expect to see here.
I'm really torn on this, Chuck. And again, it's the California again. That just running the table in the PSAC West, it just means a heck of a lot to me. But East Stroudsburg again. The outside of Kutztown, which both of that's the head-to-head, both of these teams have lost to, has done a nice job. Think, there are some games, especially, towards the end of the season there, East Stroudsburg the last week, did what they needed to get the win. Again, it's going to come down to, I think, East Stroudsburg's defense, which is maybe a little overshadowed by, their offense. Can they kind of replicate, what Kutztown did last week in really, keeping QB1, RB1, and wide receiver 1, from really making big plays and being a huge factor in the game. Cal, again, they, some of those guys on defense, guys up front, just watching, Crowder, who had a great game up front last week. I think he ended up with, 10 tackles. And again, they've got a lot of all conference guys on that side of the ball as well. it's going to be a tall task, for Kutztown. But with their offensive line, that running, again, two backs there with Lewis and Mills, if they can establish, the run. But East Stroudsburg has the ability, with McTaggart to be able to, put up points through the air too, and they've got receivers that can certainly get downfield. Again, Willis is, for Cal is kind of in a class of his own with able to be doing that. But, I think it's the, who's going to, play mistake-free football. And this is, kind of, just a cliche, but playing mistake-free football and really being able to dictate, the flow and the pace of the game, not make mistakes. I'm going back and forth right now as we're talking through it, Chuck, on which way this one's going to go. So until you put me on the spot there and say, who do I got? I'm still debating.
Well, of course I had to do my picks on Sunday night on Inside D2 Football. And as we're, talking through this and making all our picks, I actually had in my mind that I was going to pick East Stroudsburg because I see this very closely the same way you do. And I was kind of expecting that most of my teammates on the show were likely to pick California. So I had in my mind, I'm going to pick East Stroudsburg. And actually, East Stroudsburg got a lot of love on the show. A couple of guys went with East Stroud. So I picked California. That's my pick that's on the record. So I will stick with that since, Whit will be upset with me if I don't. I do think that it's going to be very difficult on the bounce back from a tough physical game against Kutztown. That's really my biggest apprehension for California. I think that's a tough bounce back. And East Stroudsburg, again, another team very much like Kutztown that's going to be a physical challenge, very tough defense. They're going to be tough against the run. They're going to get after Davis Black in the backfield. That was a big factor last week. So, I'm kind of talking myself into that I should be picking East Stroudsburg, but I also was very impressed with California's defense and the way they stood up to Kutztown, particularly in the defensive line. They were very physical up front, had a lot of success getting into the backfield, making things a little uncomfortable for Judd Novak, forcing him to improvise a little bit. So I do think that if they can play at that level again, defensively, they're going to be in very good shape. Now, I think that they need to play a lot better offensively than they did last week. Davis Black missed a couple. They had some miscommunications there. There were some throws that were rushed a little bit. And I don't think that's really representative of what this Cal team is capable of. They have, like I said earlier, I think they have some of the best skill talent offensively in this bracket. So if they can put it all together and have the right game plan, I do think California can win this game. But it truly is a toss-up, Cary.
And so for the record, I'm going to go with East Stroudsburg. So we've got one we'll split on, and we'll be able to come back next week and kind of break it all down.
So we can split the difference on the show here, and that way at least one of us can have some credibility next week when we come back and talk about the second round matchups. So those are the matchups. So Cary, let's take this down. There was some live chat in the conversation. I'll bring up a few. Really do appreciate everybody who's watching live. I'm sure it's not a huge audience midweek, but really appreciate everyone that's watching live, and we'll appreciate anyone who watches the recording during the week. Let me bring up just a couple of comments. Greg, thanks for checking in early. Check out my channel to see this year's Ashland football highlights. I wish I would have seen this like last night. I absolutely will do that, Greg. I want to be as informed as possible. I wish I would have actually seen that earlier. I did catch some of the highlights. I mentioned this earlier in the season, but Ashland's digital network, their broadcast of their football games is outstanding quality. So I was actually watching a few of their games earlier this week just to get a better handle on who the Eagles are this year. But thank you for that, Greg. I will check that out. Let's see. Craig, appreciate you checking in. I know, you are our Lone Star guy, but you are also a New Haven guy as well. So thanks for checking in. Appreciate you watching the show. Jerry, you really going to do this to me? Don't make me talk about that. Just don't make me do that. Dykstra's got it covered in the comments, so we'll let that go. By the way, Dykstra and Witt, they must be at halftime of their Marathon Super Region 3 show. I think that's still airing. It started last night at 9:00. I think it's still going on, but appreciate them checking in on the comments as well. What else did I want to bring up? Let's see. Well, I think we kind of talked about this. Is Witt's pick of New Haven on the national show a good selection? Yeah, I think they can do it, Witt. I absolutely do. I'm going with Slippery Rock. I think that, they're just a little bit more proven in these scenarios. And, we already talked a lot of other reasons. I do think they're a little bit more proven in these scenarios. But, one thing I want to mention that I didn't mention earlier, because we talked about some of the coaching staffs at some of the schools that Cary, I know you know them very well and talked to them. Coach Pinsence and his team at New Haven, outstanding, some of the best in Division II. Affectionately known as Coach Pence, he's been there now for about a decade. Does a phenomenal job with his Chargers and building up the talent level there as well. So happy to see them back in the playoffs. And yeah, Witt, I do think that they actually do have the potential to do it. Let's see. From John, is there one team that you think is most equipped to perform well in a semifinal? Does that answer differ from your pick to win SR1? For me, it doesn't. I do think that the team that would stand the best chance is Kutztown. And Cary, it's because of a couple of points that you and I have made a few times. Yes, there's good skill talent on the team. Judd Novak can be an outstanding improviser. He's just so good at extending plays, doesn't get rattled, doesn't make mistakes. A lot of good playmakers on that offense, but they're so good up front and they're so disciplined, and their coaching staff can come up with a game plan, I think, for just about anyone. So now, does that mean that they will be competitive? It all depends on the matchups. Who do they get in the semifinals? If it's them, football always comes down to the matchups. Kind of depends on who it is, but Kutztown would be my answer for sure.
Yeah, and I agree. And again, I said earlier, they're built for a deep playoff run. That defense is incredible. Up front, linebackers, defensive backs. Again, you look, last year, they came out of Super Region 1, had to make that long trip out, to Mines, and, things didn't go their way. But again, it's that defense is if you can't put, points on the board against them, they score a couple times, Kutztown's advantage.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So Cary, that is our show for the first round. We're going to bring this in and land the plane, as my friend Witt likes to say. We'll try to land the plane here right around an hour. Really appreciate you being here with me, buddy. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks. I'm very excited about seeing the playoff games this weekend, not just in Super Region 1, but around the country. Really excited to see that. And we'll be back again next week to talk through the results from this round. We'll go through a bunch of the highlights if we can. We'll talk about the games, everything that we saw, everything that we observed. And then, of course, we'll have the second round games to preview as well. So, Cary, thanks so much for being here. Really do appreciate it. Any closing thoughts or anything else you're going to be looking forward to this weekend?
No, just we had a lot of fun doing this last season. Glad we can do it again this season, and let the games begin. It should be fun on Saturday.
Let's get the playoffs going. So thanks for everybody who joined the comments live. We really do appreciate that. And we will see you back here sometime next week. Don't know exactly what day it'll be, but we'll see you back here next week for the Super Region 1 Playoff Podcast. For Cary Moyer, I'm Chuck Bitner, and we'll see you again next week.